So in one of your Telos community appearances, I'm gonna put it like that. You mentioned something along the lines of it's very important to be physically present, to go to conferences, to events, to establish a presence. You know, and talking about all the ways that we might perhaps help Serbian professionals and entrepreneurs uh, in ways of how they could think about positioning themselves better on the global stage and sort of getting more in line with expectations of, let's say, an American or more global European or an Asian business culture. Could you give some pointers on that? I mean, I know it's a bit of a tough question, but yeah,
Yeah.
I know that you have some thoughts, and especially it's really, from my end, interesting that you're an American of Serbian descent. So you have a sort of a unique, position there that you can sort of help us, sort of outside looking in.
Well, I think that no, it's a very good question actually. I think that there's a bit of a generational gap, obviously, and I think it's clear
Yeah.
for everyone to see. There's tremendous change happening, indeed, in Serbia and the Balkans and throughout Eastern Europe, and so part of it is, let's say, a little bit cultural. I would say maybe this is a spicy take,
We can
but
get controversial.
okay.
I mean,
I
not
think
too controversial, just a little bit.
I think that historically, Yugoslavian people have felt somehow that pursuing your self-interest is like a bad thing.
Yeah.
And
50 years of communism can do that.
yeah,
to you.
exactly. And that creates misalignment
Yeah.
of incentives, and it ensures that you have top-down command and control, which is something that obviously this country endured for decades.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when you look at Yugoslavia, in the beginning everything started fine, and I mean, Yugoslavia had its own aerospace industry,
Yeah.
all kinds of manufacturing, and then later just basically became non-competitive.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that it was post World War II where everything was booming. The reconstruction of Europe, you saw what happened in Western Europe and Eastern. So the system matters, and at the base layer, it's fundamentally whether or not we accept that everybody has a right to pursue their self-interest, and that's okay. What we can do is we can coordinate. Incidentally, tokens are great coordination tools, but we can coordinate and ensure that we have incentive alignment so that my individual pursuits potentially align with yours. Together, we sort of create something. We create value not only for ourselves, but other stakeholders in our enterprise. And I think like this fundamental switch is one of the things that's happening right now. The older generation still holds on to this kind of view that making money is like a bad thing.
I'm thinking that Gen Z sort of doesn't have an option to think
Correct.
like that.
Correct.
For better or for worse. I mean, it's for the better, although the circumstances might not be ideal. But I feel like even the younger generations in Serbia are getting much better at that than even my generation or probably your generation here.
100%. Well, I would even say, I say this all the time. Post World War II, if Yugoslavia had become the United States of Yugoslavia, literally copy paste to the U.S. Constitution, it would have been one of the most dynamic, prosperous countries in all of Europe.
Yeah.
And so I think the young people here have had to pick up the pieces of this like broken legacy. And, that's fundamentally due to just misalignment of incentives, which again creates this top-down command and control system, which in the end, by the way, benefits a small number of people at the top only.
Yeah.
And so you're right. The young people these days are highly integrated into the kind of global economy. Culturally,
but there's a lot of space to be, covered, and that's what I wanted to ask you. So, from what you've observed, I mean, perhaps from your own family, from your relatives and friends, and from spending your time in Belgrade, we can get a bit controversial here. Feel
Wonderful.
free. So, what are some srbijanske ili balkanske osobine that we could sort of perhaps cut down a bit on, and what are sort of, let's say, American ways of thinking that we can benefit from importing?
Well, definitely. So I think a lot of the kind of like ethnic nationalist fervor needs to go away. That doesn't mean you can't have your culture.
Or that you cannot be proud.
Correct, correct. And that's super cool. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is we're trying to collaborate.
Yeah.
We're trying to pursue our own individual interests.
Mm-hmm.
And together, that cuts through these kind of like legacy hostilities that are just like non-productive.
Yeah.
And so, and more specifically to your point, I think embracing the entrepreneur and the idea of the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in America, it's like everyone loves Elon, everyone,
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos and these guys. And so I think revering those types of figures more so than some kind of nationalistic, I don't know, whatever cult figure thing, there's a bit of a switch there that I think can happen. I definitely think, specifically in the case of Serbia, historically, I'd like to think that, Serbia and the United States has a very long history of like many good things together.
Absolutely.
Obviously, there's some tension not too long ago, but I think we can get past that. And so reorientating ourselves towards the U.S., towards the West in particular. Nikola Tesla, went to New York and he was like, and so
help create a modern world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a tremendous history together. And so embracing that, I think, is very, very important. And from that, benefits start to derive, like access to markets, access to resources. I think that, and one of the things I talk to my colleagues in the kind of venture capital space is just how tremendous the talent is here.
Yeah.
And the extent to which we can start to realign a little bit can actually open the floodgates. Because at the end of the day, if you're a good developer and you work hard and, you can compete, well, guess what? Silicon Valley is looking for that, and they're going to invest in you. And so suddenly things change very, very quickly. So definitely free market orientation, cutting through a lot of these legacy hostility, global culture, exactly. And moreover, Yugoslavia and Serbia in particular somehow has these great international relations. I think one of the good things that Yugoslavia did was it was non-aligned for many years.
Yeah.
So we actually have this like tremendous history with many African nations, very friendly, hostility. Serbs never built any boats, so they didn't colonize anyone, right? We have this legacy of friendship and mutual respect. Likewise in Asia as well. And so I think we can cultivate that more. Definitely
build on that.
Correct. Build on that. Obviously, Serbia has a close relationship with China, but I think it can do more to establish, entrepreneurs here can establish relationships in Japan, in Singapore, some of these other markets as well.
So getting a bit more tactical, you mentioned earlier on when we chatted, defaulting to respect in communication and obviously in the way that you partner up with someone. What does that mean in practice? I feel like when you say default to respect, I haven't heard that phrase before, and I immediately feel it. I like it. But what does that mean for perhaps, a founder in the audience who doesn't necessarily get it, viscerally?
Well, I would say, so one of the things that consensus that we tried to put into practice was flat organizations. So let's say holacracy, or the opposite of hierarchy. Insofar as, and maybe it doesn't work so well, and there's some nuances, and we can talk about that. But generally speaking, not, with brute force imposing yourself on others, right? But rather in a collaborative way, and you can still have expectations. You can set expectations, and you can sort of enforce when those expectations aren't met. But not doing it in this like brute force way, like not talking down and yelling at someone, and not, and so that's kind of like one part of it.
Yeah, Balkans folks like to yell sometimes.
We can, well, we're like these emotional. We have a lot of Neanderthal still left in in us. That's why we're so big. We used to eat all those woolly mammoths back in the day. But so and then also I think empathy is important insofar as just understanding that everybody's trying. It's a complicated world. Many things are going on, and it's hard to do innovation. And so keeping that in mind when you have a confrontation, when you have something you need to resolve, you can sort of like in a very professional way outline, your concerns and talk through it without resorting to this is your fault and you're an idiot, right?
Yeah.
And so that's very important. That's very, very important. I don't know of any, and by the way, you look at some of these heroic, titans of industry, Steve Jobs, etc. And there's lots of stories of Steve Jobs being tough with people,
and a bit of an asshole sometimes,
and a bit of an asshole, but at the same time, his people loved him, right? Because there was that respect. Now, Of course, there's circumstances in certain relationships where you can get a little spicier with someone, and that's fine. You just have to be very appropriate with that and understand the dynamic. But generally speaking, you know, if your colleagues and the people you work with understand that you all respect each other and that you're all equals, even though some of you might have more authority than others in certain contexts within your organization, I think you can get a lot more done. You know, and especially when you think about innovation, you know, you look at the crypto space, there's a lot of people who are brilliant and can understand, you know, they can expand our understanding of the unknown, but maybe they're socially a little bit awkward, or maybe they're, you know, just
nerds can be that way.
Yeah, I mean, and so you have to understand how to get the most out of people. And I think, you know, being super aggressive might not work so well sometimes. Likewise,
catch more flies with honey.
Correct.
As opposed to vinegar.
Correct. And then I think there's other things, like, let's say, in a more practical sense, like, obviously these days everyone on social media, they express themselves, they express their opinions. Sometimes that can be contentious political stuff. I think that within an organization, you know, you should also kind of have like, you know, it's a safe space where people can come to work and focus on work, right? And I think that's one of the kind of like important strategic things to think about when you're building your organization is, you know, this is where we come to work and we respect each other, and this is a place of work. You're free to voice your opinion, and, you know, you can talk about stuff on your break or in different ways or whatever. But I think, you know, when we're at work, that's what we're focused on. You can check in on your colleagues and make sure everyone's doing okay, and maybe sometimes someone is having a tough time. But, you know, I think there's also a lot of value in kind of creating a little bit of separation there, where I'm here to help serve my self-interest and your self-interest, because we're building this thing together and we want it to succeed. And so, you know, this environment and this, you know, area here is dedicated to that.
How would you describe like the 3 most important aspects of the American business culture?
Yeah.
If you had to choose.
Well, I would say the modern American business culture is dominated by tech, obviously, and the tech culture. And, you know, one of the things with tech is it's very fluid, like things can change very quickly. So the extent to which you can ride the wave and be fluid. Obviously, there was a big shift from working in the office to working from home, and now there's kind of a big shift to back in the office.
Sorry for interrupting you. What I meant was, how should I, as a, let's say, founder from Serbia, approach talking to business folks from the US? What are the mores and rules and norms that I should sort of be mindful of?
Well, you know, in America, time is money, right? So I think being very open, transparent, and kind of like focused on what it is you're trying to achieve is well appreciated. Sometimes in Serbia, we tend to blend social and business a little too much, right?
And a bit of politics and being angry.
Exactly. We, together with our colleagues, go to the cafe, smoke, and complain about everything, right? And I think that's not really
the American way now.
Less so. It's more like, you know, I'm here, let's do this together, and let's make it. I could care less where you're from, who you are, as long as we can make money together. That's kind of like a American ideal, for better or worse. It is.
But at the same time, I have a feeling that Americans are really good at being nice and being polite most of the time, I guess.
Well, generally speaking, I think so. Canadians even more so.
Yeah.
But you know, at the end of the day,
so it's a bit of a balance, you know, self-interest and also not appearing as extremely self-interested.
Well, I think
which can be a culture shock for folks from Europe sometimes.
Well, the other thing I think is very important is sometimes here in Serbia we look down on certain people and like contingent upon the job that they're doing. Like there's a kind of classist, you know, there's a hierarchy to these things. Whereas I think in America it's more like, look, dude, if you're the guy that's cleaning my house and you do a great job cleaning my house, number one, I'm going to pay you a lot of money. I'm going to be happy to pay you. I'm going to keep hiring you, and I respect that you're doing a great job.
You appreciate them.
Yeah, I don't give a crap that you're a house cleaner or whatever. You're doing a great job for me. And that's kind of like, let's say...
that's a great point.
That's kind of a good way to integrate, you know, the economy and ultimately society, versus sometimes here it's kind of like, well, you know, you're just a janitor. What the hell do you know?
Sometimes we can even project that.
Yes.
So if I'm coming from Serbia to talk to a US person, sometimes you can think, oh, he or she is going to think that I'm just... someone coming from across the world who's insignificant, and that's projecting our own values which is not necessarily the case. I mean, I think you put it very beautifully. If you do a good job, I don't care. We don't have to have that hierarchies. You're probably a person that has had more global experience than most of us. You work with the folks in Asia, in Europe, and the US. So could you shine a bit of light, or just share your impressions of doing business with folks in Asia from your standpoint as an American, but also who has a sense for how stuff works in Serbia?
Well, so first of all, I would say it's very important to understand exactly where you are. I mean, the culture in the Philippines, for example, is very different than the culture in Japan.
Yeah, Asia is not necessarily a small.
Correct.
A small
it's not a monolith.
Yeah.
But there are certain let's say principles that are very, very important. And so you may have heard this term saving face, which is to say respect is very, very important. I think that's one of the absolute deal breakers. You go to Japan, everyone is extremely polite. They're very, very hospitable. It doesn't mean they're not going to be tough when you're negotiating and they're not going to serve their. Of course they are, but this is kind of like a fundamental principle in that society. Maybe sometimes when you go to a place like Hong Kong, it's very up-tempo, it's very, very fast, and it's like, let's get to the point, let's get to the point. Likewise, certain other regions might have their own cultural nuances. For example, you go to Malaysia, it's a wonderful place. It's such a hybrid, you've got many different cultures there. You've got Chinese, you've got Malay, you've got different religions, etc. Singapore is very similar. And so, these are kind of like blended cultures where there's like different opportunities. But all of that has to be really, really rooted in respect. You can't be like rude, particularly as a Westerner, because a lot of, you look at Thailand, and Thai people are so nice. They're Buddhists. They're very, very, but then they have to just deal with like all these like shit tourists that go there and get drunk and they're assholes and everything. And so imagine you have to deal with that all the time. Like, don't be that guy. That's like a really important part of it. And then finally, just and I think this is a really interesting opportunity, particularly for Serbian entrepreneurs, especially in the tech scene. There's so much tremendous, let's say, core protocol innovation here, great protocol engineers. And I think trying to evaluate opportunities there and how you can, collaborate and add value. For example, the Philippines, I spent quite a bit of time there. Maybe it's not such a strong core engineering hub, but great designers, beautiful front ends, lots of creativity. And so that's an example of a market where maybe there's a really good fit. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Likewise, when you get to Japan, for example, the Japanese internet is completely different than anything we would expect, right? And it has its own.
Is still a thing.
Yeah, it has its own. Well, Viber is like probably one of the biggest communication apps in Asia, for example.
Oh.
It's huge. Yeah, I have Viber. I use it all the time there. But so understanding the nuances, understanding which countries do what well, and how you can integrate and how you can add value. I think is a tremendous opportunity. And yeah, just being mindful, being polite, being respectful. I mean, those are kind of like basic things, but they go a long way.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the cases, I mean, perhaps improbable, but definitely illustrative of, opportunities on a global scale is Mihailo from Polygon, integrating with folks from India. I mean, and you had your role in that. So is this a model for entrepreneurs from Serbia to be thinking of?
Oh, absolutely. And again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, where I think if you develop a certain set of skill sets, those can be valuable anywhere in the world. And so, in the case of Polygon, they were able to leverage. So one of the things we did early on very well was onboard many projects. And, obviously going onto a new network, there's lots of little nuance or nuisance issues rather. So for example, RPC endpoint issues, etc. Polygon would like very quickly open up a group chat. They'd have like 4 or 5 people in there, technical support. And, a lot of times these guys were from India, and then they might have a core developer from Serbia. And so now you have this like, 5-6 man team, and then the customer, the client would come in, and these issues would get resolved very quickly. And so we were able to onboard huge amounts of projects very, very quickly. So that's like an example of like matching, in a really great way, talent and resources commensurate to each region, working together, and then onboarding huge amounts of, we onboarded so many projects very, very quickly precisely because of this reason. So yeah, I think just being very collaborative, understanding how to integrate with different markets. another, I would say a great example for Serbia to consider is Israel. And the reason I would say that is because, startup nation, I mean, it's a bit of a meme. I think they've got like 7 or 8 million people, very small domestic market. And so they have to think globally, like Waze, right? Is like, and so, thinking about how to, at that level, particularly on the tech side of things, integrate globally, build products that service global markets. Key strategic focus, I think, going forward, and something entrepreneurs here should be really thinking about.
And I feel like a good part of Israel's success was the fact that they have such a huge and active diaspora in the U.S. And again, that's something that hopefully you could have an additional role, as you did with Mikhailo, with some of the folks that are that have been watching our chat today. Thank you so much for your time. This was a great convo, very enjoyable to me, hopefully to you as well.
Super good.